Welcome to The Explainer. You know, if you've ever watched the news and just wondered what on earth these massive economic forces are that shape our world, well, you are in the right place. Today, we're going to demystify the whole shebang. Let's dive right in.
So why do some countries grow richer while others just seem to struggle? A lot of times, it actually comes down to differences in things like worker productivity and having the right physical capital. And why does the cost of living feel like it just keeps rising, constantly eating away at your wallet? To get to the bottom of these absolutely massive questions, we have to look at the big picture of our economy. And that is exactly the mental model we're building today.
Here's a quick roadmap for our journey. We'll start with the big picture, then measuring national output, we'll unpack the cost of living, and finally, steering the economy.
Let's kick things off with Section 1, the big picture.
Before we figure out how the economy moves, we really need to understand the scale we're dealing with. And that brings us to macroeconomics. So the prefix macro actually comes from the Greek word makros, which literally just means large. So instead of zooming in on a single market, like, say, the market for coffee or beef, macroeconomics is the study of the entire national economy. It's looking at the combined aggregate variables, things like overall price levels, total output, the policies governments use. It's the ultimate bird's eye view.
To really wrap our heads around this, let's contrast it. Microeconomics, well, that's all about individual choices. It's your single household's budget, or how one specific business prices a product. Macroeconomics, on the flip side, is the whole economy. It's national output, the overall price levels for everything, total employment.
Think of it like this. One single person getting a pink slip and losing their job, that's a microeconomic issue. I mean, it's devastating for them, sure, but it's isolated. In fact, even when the economy is totally booming, unemployment never hits absolute zero. There's always going to be some frictional unemployment, like people quitting to spend a few months searching for a better job, or structural unemployment, where workers are learning new skills for a changing economy. That's just the natural rate of unemployment. But when you have widespread unemployment affecting millions of people across the whole country, okay, now that becomes a massive macroeconomic issue.
And here's the tricky part. Sometimes a choice that makes total sense on a micro level creates a complete mess on a macro level. Just imagine you're at a live concert, right? A few people stand up to get a better view. Totally rational microeconomic choice. But eventually, everyone stands up. Now, literally, nobody can see any better than they did before, and your legs are just tired. That is a perfect example of how individual choices can lead to totally unexpected, self-defeating macroeconomic results.
Moving right along to Section 2, measuring national output.
If that's the massive scale we're working with, how do we actually put a hard number on an entire nation's output? The answer is GDP, gross domestic product. You can think of this as the ultimate barometer of an economy's health. By definition, it's the total market value of all final goods and services produced within a country over a specific period, usually a year. And GDP is actually measuring two things at once, total output and total income. Because if you think about it, every single dollar spent by a buyer is a dollar of income for a seller.
Let's build this from the ground up to make it super concrete. Step 1, you open a coffee shop. Step 2, you buy beans, you hire some workers. Step 3, on opening day, you sell 600 drinks at $4 each. Boom, your daily output is $2,400. That is your firm's production. Now, step 4, zoom way out. Add up the output of your coffee shop, plus literally every doctor's office, software firm, and fast food joint across the entire nation. That massive, multi-trillion-dollar sum, that is GDP.
But there's a catch. When you look at the historical data, you'll notice a widening gap between nominal GDP and real GDP. Nominal GDP rises way faster. Why? Well, strictly because of inflation. Prices just go up. Real GDP, however, strips that inflation away to show us the actual real growth in production. Without making that adjustment, we might sit there thinking, wow, we're producing so much more, when in reality, things are just getting more expensive.
Which brings us right to Section 3, the cost of living.
Let's talk about that exact phenomenon, rising prices and what it actually means for your wallet. We're talking about inflation. And the technical definition here is a general and ongoing rise in the overall level of prices in an entire economy. The keywords there are ongoing and overall. We aren't just talking about a one-time price jump for apples because of a bad farming season. It means there is a persistent, continuous upward pressure on almost all prices.
To see this in action, you really just have to throw on an old movie. Take the 1960 thriller Psycho. In that movie, a hotel room cost just $10 a night. I mean, Today, $10 is barely going to get you a coffee and a pastry in the hotel lobby. It perfectly illustrates how inflation destroys purchasing power over time. A dollar today simply buys you far fewer goods than it used to.
So what's actually causing this? Usually it boils down to the money supply increasing too quickly or total consumer demand just completely outpacing the total supply of goods. But sometimes it's an external shock. Imagine an oil shock, where the global supply of oil suddenly plummets. Oil prices skyrocket, and because basically every business needs oil for transportation and production, their costs go way up. What do? They pass those higher costs directly onto us, the consumers, and the end result? It completely destroys our purchasing power.
So how do economists keep track of all this? They use the Consumer Price Index, or CPI. Basically, they track the changing price of a virtual basket of goods that an average household buys. And the really smart part is, they weight the items based on how much of our income we actually spend on them. A 10% increase in your rent is going to hurt your budget a heck of a lot more than a 10% increase in the price of carrots, right? The CPI reflects that reality so we can gauge the true cost of living.
All right, let's wrap things up with Section 4, Steering the Economy. Now that we know how the macroeconomy works, how do governments actually try to control these massive forces? Think of it kind of like a dashboard. The goals are pretty straightforward: drive economic growth, keep unemployment low, and keep inflation low. To try and hit those targets, leaders rely on two main policy tools: monetary policy and fiscal policy. Let's break those down.
Tool number 1 is monetary policy. This is managed by a country's central bank, like the Federal Reserve in the US. Let's say the economy falls into a recession, maybe because of a huge drop in demand, kind of like the housing crash during the 2008 Great Recession. People lose their wealth, they lose jobs, and they just stop spending money. The central bank can step in with expansionary monetary policy. They lower interest rates to make borrowing cheaper. The goal there is to encourage people and businesses to start spending and investing again to jumpstart the economy.
Then we have tool number 2, fiscal policy. This one is controlled by the government itself, Congress, and the president. They steer things by changing government spending and taxes. If they're trying to fight off a recession, they might use expansionary fiscal policy. That means lowering taxes so you have more money in your pocket to spend, or they might massively increase government spending on things like roads and schools to directly create jobs.
But, and this is a big but, these tools have side effects, namely deficits. A budget deficit happens when the government spends more money than it collects in taxes in a given year, so they have to borrow to make up the difference. While that extra spending can help create jobs in a pinch, borrowing too much can actually drive up interest rates, which makes it way harder for private businesses to borrow and invest. Economists call that problem crowding out. On the flip side, a trade deficit happens when a nation imports more goods than it exports. And if you're buying more from the rest of the world than you're selling, well, you have to borrow money from foreign investors to pay for it all.
And there you have it, the big picture. From an individual's pink slip to massive global trade deficits, it is all completely connected. Which really leaves us with one incredibly vital question to ponder. How will the macroeconomic choices being debated and made by our leaders today actually shape your personal financial reality tomorrow? Getting a grip on these forces is the very first step to navigating them. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning the big picture, and I'll catch you next time.